The Krillian dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars. Commander Zexar stood in the command bridge of the lead vessel, his 4 arms crossed behind his back. His species had conquered 100 worlds. Earth would be number 101. Primitive world, his lieutenant hissed through mandibles. Their cities fall easily. Only small pockets of resistance remain. Zexar's compound eyes focused on the holographic display. Most of Earth's major cities had surrendered after the first wave. But there were areas marked in red. Areas where Krillian forces had gone silent. Were these zones? Zexar asked. Dense vegetation regions. The locals call them jungles. Amazon, Congo, Southeast Asia. The lieutenant's voice carried dismissal. Scattered military units fled there. Nothing significant. Zexar studied the data. 17 squads had entered these green zones. None had reported back. Send the 3rd Battalion. Full deployment. Crush whatever resistance hides in those trees. The 3rd Battalion consisted of 800 of the finest Krillian shock troops. Each warrior stood 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor plating that could deflect primitive projectiles. Their plasma weapons had reduced entire civilizations to ash. Major Krilltalk led the first wave into what the humans called the Amazon rainforest. His troops marched in perfect formation through the initial tree line. Their advanced sensors showed no immediate threats, just dense vegetation and primitive life forms. Pathetic Krilltalk. These humans hide in trees like their ancient ancestors. Forward march. Burn everything if necessary. The jungle seemed to swallow them. The canopy above blocked out most sunlight, creating a green twilight. Strange sounds echoed from every direction. Krilltalk's troops maintained discipline, but something felt wrong. Their sensors kept glitching. False readings appeared and vanished. Then, the first soldier disappeared. One moment, he was at the rear of the formation. The next, only his weapon remained on the muddy ground. No sound, no energy discharge. Just gone. Close ranks. Krilltalk barked. Defensive formation. More soldiers vanished. Always from the edges. Always in complete silence. The Krillians fired blindly into the green walls surrounding them. Their plasma bolts scorched trees but hit nothing else. Sir, motion sensors are useless, a technician reported. Everything here moves. Every leaf, every branch. Can't distinguish threats from background. A thin wire appeared across the path. A soldier's leg touched it. The ground erupted, not from advanced explosives, but simple mechanical traps. Sharpened wood stakes shot up from concealed pits. The primitive weapons couldn't pierce Krillian armor, but they caused chaos. Soldiers stumbled, broke formation. That's when the humans struck. They came from above, from below, from inside hollow trees. Not with advanced weapons, but with cunning and knowledge of their environment. Captain Maria Santos of the Brazilian Special Forces had spent 15 years in these jungles. Her unit knew every tree, every stream, every sound. The humans didn't try to match Krillian firepower. They turned the jungle itself into a weapon. Vines became snares. Mud became quicksand. Insects disturbed by human handlers swarmed over alien sensors, blocking their vision. Natural toxins from plants and animals harmless to humans but unknown to alien biology created confusion and disorientation. Santos watched from her concealed position as the aliens floundered. Their advanced technology meant nothing here. The jungle didn't care about their superiority. It swallowed them just as it had swallowed countless others throughout history. Team 3, execute, she whispered into her radio. More Krillians vanished, pulled into the canopy by vines and human hands. The aliens' panic grew. They fired wildly, creating noise that masked the humans' movements. Their formation completely broken, they tried to retreat. But the path they'd taken no longer existed. The jungle had closed behind them. Every direction looked the same. Their navigation systems, designed for open battlefields or urban environments, couldn't process the chaotic organic patterns of the rainforest. Major Krilltalk screamed orders, try to restore discipline. A dart, tiny and primitive, found a gap in his neck armor. The paralytic agent wouldn't have affected a human for more than a few minutes. But Krillian physiology reacted differently. He collapsed, conscious but unable to move, forced to watch his mighty battalion fall apart. By nightfall, only scattered plasma fire marked where 800 elite soldiers had entered the jungle. By dawn, even that had stopped. Santos and her team collected alien weapons and equipment, studying them in hidden camps. They learned weak points in Krillian armor. They discovered which native plants caused severe allergic reactions in alien respiratory systems. Every captured piece of technology became a lesson in defeating the invaders. Word spread through hidden communication networks. Resistance fighters in the Congo learned from Brazilian experiences. Vietnamese jungle warfare experts shared decades of knowledge. Indigenous peoples who had lived in these forests for thousands of years taught modern soldiers forgotten skills. The jungles of Earth became death traps for the Krillian forces. Not through superior technology, but through the opposite. Humans used knowledge passed down through generations. They used patience, cunning, and complete harmony with their environment. Commander XAR received the reports with growing disbelief. The 3rd Battalion gone. The 5th Regiment, 70% casualties, survivors refusing to enter any forested area. The elite 9th Squadron found tied to trees, alive, but psychologically broken, raving about shadows that moved and ground that swallowed soldiers whole. Bomb the jungles from orbit, his advisors suggested. But XAR had studied the maps. These jungle regions were vast, covering significant portions of the planet. Destroying them would damage the very resources they'd come to claim. And the humans had learned to hide their cities and facilities beneath the canopy. Orbital bombardment would accomplish nothing except wasting ammunition. Send the mechanized units, XAR ordered. Vehicles will protect our forces. The jungle fighters had anticipated this. In Colombia, former drug cartel members who had spent decades evading government forces in thick forests shared their expertise. They knew how to disable vehicles, how to turn narrow paths into death traps, how to use the terrain against any enemy. The first Krillian hover tanks entered the jungle confidently. Within hours, they discovered that their repulsor fields, designed for flat surfaces, couldn't compensate for the constantly shifting, uneven jungle floor. Massive trees fell across their paths, not cut down, but strategically weakened to fall at precisely the right moment. Vines, strengthened with stolen alien cable, tangled in propulsion systems. Mud mixed with chemical compounds clogged air intakes. The sophisticated machines ground to a halt, their crews forced to abandon them or be entombed in metal coffins. The psychological warfare intensified. The jungle fighters had learned to use captured Krillian communication devices. They broadcast the screams of trapped aliens throughout the night. They left grotesque displays made from abandoned equipment, creating shrines that seemed to suggest the jungle itself was alive and hungry. Krillian morale plummeted. Soldiers who had conquered desert worlds and ice planets found themselves terrified of Earth's green spaces. They refused orders to enter forested areas. Some shot their own officers rather than march into the trees. The resistance grew bolder. Strike teams emerged from jungles to hit Krillian positions in occupied cities, then melted back into the green walls before retaliation could arrive. Supply lines through any area with significant vegetation became impossible to maintain. In Southeast Asia, the situation became even worse for the invaders. Here, jungle warfare wasn't just military doctrine, it was cultural memory. Grandparents had fought in these jungles. Their knowledge, combined with stolen alien technology, created a nightmare scenario for Krillian forces. Vietnamese fighters had turned their section of jungle into an even more elaborate trap system. Entire underground cities existed beneath the forest floor, invisible to alien sensors. Krillian patrols would enter the jungle and find themselves walking above an enemy they couldn't detect or reach. The humans had learned to use the aliens' technology against them. Capture plasma weapons were rigged as mines. Alien communication systems were hacked to send false information. Even Krillian food supplies were poisoned with jungle toxins that their purification systems couldn't detect. Lieutenant Vesnor led what would be the last major Krillian jungle operation. His orders were simple: establish a permanent base inside the jungle, prove that Krillian superiority could overcome any environment. He chose a clearing in the Congo, had his troops burn a perimeter, set up defensive positions. For 3 days, they held their ground. Then the rains came. The cleared ground turned to mud soup. Defensive positions flooded. Equipment that functioned perfectly in climate-controlled conditions failed in the humid environment. And with the rain came the humans. They didn't attack directly. They waited. They watched. They let nature do the work. Insects invaded every shelter. Moisture corroded sensitive equipment. Food spoiled in hours instead of days. Medical supplies degraded. The jungle pressed in from all sides, reclaiming the burned areas with shocking speed. Vesnor's troops began to fall ill, not from any weapon, but from countless small things. Infected cuts that their medicine couldn't heal properly in the humidity. Respiratory problems from mold and spores. Dehydration from not understanding how to properly maintain fluid balance in the oppressive environment. The humans struck when the aliens were weakest, not as a military force, but as ghosts. Soldiers on guard duty were found dead at their posts. No wounds visible until examination revealed tiny punctures from poisoned thorns. Officers woke to find themselves alone. Their entire command staff vanished in the night. Vesnor tried to maintain order, but paranoia had infected his troops worse than any jungle disease. They saw enemies in every shadow, heard threats in every sound. When the final assault came, most of his soldiers were already beaten. The Congo fighters took the base without firing a shot. They simply appeared, surrounding the demoralized aliens, offering them a choice: surrender or feed the jungle. Most chose surrender. The captured aliens were blindfolded and marched for days through paths only the humans knew. When the blindfolds were removed, they found themselves in hidden camps where humans studied their technology, their biology, their psychology. Everything learned was shared across the global resistance network. Back on the command ship, Zexar faced a crisis. His invasion force, which had easily conquered Earth's cities, was being slowly consumed by its forests. Every attempt to establish control over jungle regions failed. Worse, the success of jungle fighters inspired resistance in other environments. Mountain fighters in the Andes began using similar tactics in their terrain. Desert nomads adapted jungle warfare principles to their own lands. Even in occupied cities, people created urban jungles, maze-like territories where knowledge of local terrain gave defenders massive advantages. The Krillian Empire had never faced this kind of warfare. They were prepared for stand-up fights, for matching technology against technology. They weren't prepared for an enemy that turned nature itself into a weapon system. Zexar called a meeting of his senior staff. The holographic display showed Earth, with growing red zones marking areas under effective human control. Most were centered around major forests and jungles, but the red was spreading. "We have superior numbers, superior weapons, superior technology," Zexar said. "Yet we're losing ground to primitives hiding in trees. Explain this failure." His officers shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Science Commander Dexar spoke. "Sir, we've analyzed the situation. The humans aren't fighting us with technology. They're fighting us with evolution." "Explain." "Humans evolved in these environments. Their ancestors lived in jungles, learned to climb before they could properly walk. Their brains developed to process the complex patterns of organic environments. Their bodies adapted to the climate, the diseases, the challenges. So when they enter a jungle, they're not in enemy territory. They're home. Every instinct, every evolutionary advantage activates. Meanwhile, our species evolved on plains and in hives. We're not just fighting humans in those jungles. We're fighting millions of years of adaptation." The War Council fell silent. The implications were clear. Earth's jungles covered vast areas. the humans could maintain resistance indefinitely in these regions. And as long as they held the jungles, they could strike at Krillian forces anywhere. What do you recommend? Zexar asked. Withdrawal from jungle regions. Consolidate our hold on cities and open terrain. Except that certain parts of this planet will remain outside our control. It was unprecedented. The Krillian Empire had never accepted partial victory. But Earth was teaching them humility in the most primal way possible. The order went out. No Krillian forces were to enter major forested areas. A de facto border emerged between occupied territories and free jungle zones. But this arrangement satisfied no one. The humans used their jungle sanctuaries to build strength, to plan, to prepare. They studied captured Krillian technology and adapted it to their purposes. They trained new fighters in jungle warfare techniques. They reached out to resistance groups worldwide, sharing knowledge and resources. Most importantly, they began to understand their enemy. Krillian psychology, built around concepts of technological superiority and ordered battlefield dominance, couldn't process defeat by inferior forces. The jungle victories created cracks in Krillian morale that spread throughout their entire occupation force. Young Krillian soldiers heard whispered stories about Earth's green hells. Veterans who had survived jungle encounters were psychologically scarred, jumping at sounds that reminded them of rustling leaves. The mighty Krillian war machine, which had crushed advanced civilizations, was being brought low by humans with blowguns and vine traps. As the first year of occupation ended, Zexar studied his reports with growing concern. The jungle regions weren't just holding out, they were expanding. Humans were actually planting new forests, using fast-growing species to create new defensive zones. They were teaching urban populations how to create vertical gardens that could hide fighters. They were proving that low-tech could beat high-tech if you chose the right battlefield. The commander's four hands clenched in frustration. He had come to conquer a primitive world. Instead, he was learning why Earth's dominant species had survived everything their planet could throw at them. Not through superior technology, but through adaptability, cunning, and an intimate understanding of their environment. In the depths of the Amazon, Maria Santos cleaned her captured plasma rifle while rain drummed on the canopy above. Around her, fighters from a dozen nations trained together, sharing techniques and building bonds. They knew the war was far from over, but they also knew something the Krillians were only beginning to understand. Earth wasn't just a planet with jungles. Earth was a planet where humans and jungles had evolved together for millions of years. And in that green embrace, humanity had found its greatest strength against the stars themselves. The Krillian High Command had never convened an emergency session for a primitive world before. Yet here they were, 47 Supreme Commanders gathered in the vast chamber aboard the flagship, discussing Earth. Commander Zexar stood before them, displaying casualty reports that defied all logic. 30% losses in jungle regions. 0% territory secured in those areas. This is unacceptable, growled Supreme General Vextor, his ancient carapace scarred from 100 successful campaigns. The humans have turned their primitive environments into fortresses, Zexar explained. They don't fight like any enemy we've encountered. They merge with their surroundings, become part of the ecosystem itself. Then, we'll burn every forest on the planet, Vextor declared. Negative, interrupted Science Commander Dexiar. Environmental destruction on that scale would render the planet worthless. The atmospheric processors, mineral cycles, weather patterns, all depend on those forests. Destroy them, and we destroy the prize we came to claim. The debate raged for hours. Some called for total orbital bombardment. Others suggested biological weapons. But every solution that could defeat the jungle fighters would also destroy what made Earth valuable, its remarkable biodiversity and resources. Meanwhile, in hidden camps across Earth's tropical regions, humanity was undergoing its own transformation. The jungle had become more than a hiding place. It had become a teacher. In Borneo, where orangutans watched from high branches, Japanese engineer Kenji Nakamura worked with local Dayak tribesmen to create new weapons. Not high-tech marvels, but simple, effective tools that merge traditional knowledge with captured alien materials. Look, the elderly tribesman explained, showing Kenji a blowgun. Our ancestors used these for generations. Silent, accurate, deadly. Now watch. He loaded a dart tipped with a crystalline fragment, part of a destroyed Krillian armor plate, shaped and sharpened to microscopic precision. The crystal could pierce the joints in alien armor where traditional darts couldn't. The jungle provides everything, the old man said. Poisons that can fuse their sensors. Vines stronger than their cables. Most importantly, patience. The trees have stood for centuries. We can wait too. Kenji documented everything, uploading data to hidden servers that connected jungle fighters worldwide. In the Congo, chemists analyzed plant toxins that affected Krillian physiology. In the Amazon, engineers created vehicles that could navigate dense forest without disturbing the canopy. In Southeast Asia, communication specialists developed networks that used natural phenomena, bird calls, insect rhythms, even tree growth patterns, to transmit messages undetectable by alien technology. The transformation went deeper than tactics and technology. Humanity was rediscovering something lost in centuries of urbanization, the connection to the natural world. City dwellers who fled to the jungles learned from indigenous peoples who had never lost that connection. Ancient knowledge, dismissed by modern civilization, proved more valuable than doctoral degrees when survival meant understanding which vine could hold your weight and which insects bite meant death. Dr. Sarah Chun, a biotechnology expert from Singapore, found herself learning from an Amazonian shaman whose people had lived in the forest for thousands of years. Her advanced education meant nothing when the shaman saved her life by recognizing the subtle signs of a Krillian patrol long before any technology could detect them. Your machines look for machines, he explained, but the forest speaks in whispers. The birds tell us when strangers come. The monkeys show us safe paths. The trees themselves remember who passes beneath them. It sounded like mysticism to her scientific mind, but Chen watched him predict Krillian movements with uncanny accuracy. She began documenting his methods, finding scientific explanations for what seemed like magic. Pheromone detection, subsonic vibrations, electromagnetic sensitivity. Humans had evolved these abilities but forgotten how to use them. The jungle was teaching them to remember. The Krillians tried adapting their tactics. They sent in smaller units trained specifically for forest combat. These specialists lasted longer than regular troops, but still fell to human cunning. The aliens couldn't overcome millions of years of evolution in months of training. Strike Team 7, led by Captain Wolf Anderson, a former U.S. Marine turned resistance fighter, demonstrated why. His mixed unit of Americans, Brazilians, and indigenous fighters had been hunting Krillian patrols for weeks. They moved through the canopy like ghosts, sometimes traveling for miles without touching the ground. See how they move? Wolf whispered to a new recruit, pointing at a Krillian patrol below. Linear thinking. Always the most direct path. They see the jungle as an obstacle to overcome. And we, the recruit asked. We see it as home. Watch. The patrol was following a stream, logical from a military perspective. Water source, clearer sightlines, easier movement. But jungle fighters knew streams meant predictable routes. Wolf's team had prepared this section weeks ago, not with obvious traps, but with subtle modifications that would seem natural to hurried aliens. A log across the stream, seemingly fallen naturally. Vines hanging just low enough to snag equipment. Mud that looked solid, but had been carefully mixed to create suction. Each obstacle slowed the patrol, frustrated them, made them cluster together for security. That's when the hornets attacked. Not ordinary hornets, but a species the locals called devil wasps. Wolf's indigenous teammates had carefully relocated their nest to this precise spot, knowing alien armor had small ventilation gaps that angry wasps could exploit. The Krillians panicked, firing wildly at an enemy their weapons couldn't hit. In the chaos, humans struck from multiple directions, not to kill, but to disable and capture. Every prisoner taken meant more intelligence, more equipment, more psychological impact on remaining Krillian forces. The interrogation of captured aliens revealed crucial information. The Krillians weren't just losing tactically, they were losing psychologically. Many suffered from what human psychologists recognized as severe PTSD. The constant vigilance required in jungles, the inability to trust any surface or shadow, the reversal of predator-prey dynamics. It shattered their confidence. One captured officer, treated humanely in hidden camps, eventually began talking. "You don't understand," he said through a translator. "My species conquered the hegemony of Altair. We crushed the Silicon Princes. We are apex predators of the galaxy. But here we are prey." The humans learned that Krillian society was built on strict hierarchies and technological superiority. Take away those advantages, force them into primal survival situations, and their psychology crumbled. The jungle didn't just defeat their bodies, it broke their minds. This knowledge spread through the resistance network. Psychological operations intensified. Jungle fighters began leaving non-lethal calling cards. Krillian equipment hung from trees like primitive trophies. Alien weapons returned to camps with critical components removed and flowers placed in the barrels. Messages written in the aliens' own language, saying simply the trees are watching. Commander XAR received reports of increasing mental breakdowns among his troops. Soldiers who had never shown fear in previous campaigns now refused direct orders to enter forested areas. Some had to be sedated after reporting hallucinations of moving trees and speaking animals. The medical staff was overwhelmed with cases they couldn't explain or treat. "It's not just military defeat," the chief medical officer reported. "It's existential terror. Our soldiers' minds cannot process being hunted by a biosphere. They're breaking at fundamental levels." Desperate for solutions, XAR authorized increasingly extreme measures. Chemical defoliants were deployed in limited areas. The jungle fighters responded by using the poison zones as trap areas, luring Krillian forces into toxic kill zones their own weapons had created. Attempts to use fire proved equally futile. Jungle fighters had generations of experience with forest fires. They knew how to create fire breaks, how to use controlled burns to their advantage, how to survive in smoke and ash. Some groups actually encouraged Krillian fire attacks, using the smoke as cover for massive relocations and counterstrikes. The war's nature was changing both sides. Humans were becoming something new, not quite the urban civilization they had been, not quite the primitive tribes of their ancestors, but a fusion of both. Children in the jungle camps learned calculus and spear throwing, computer programming, and bird language, molecular biology, and vine weaving. These children represented humanity's future if they survived. They played games that would have horrified pre-invasion parents. Hunt the Krillian taught them to move silently and think strategically. Jungle memory helped them memorize every tree and path in their territory. They learned to sleep in trees, to eat insects without disgust, to find water in plants, to navigate by stars filtered through leaves. But they also studied captured alien technology with minds unconstrained by conventional thinking. A 12-year-old girl in the Philippines created a communication device that used bioluminescent fungi to transmit coded messages. A teenager in Central Africa discovered how to reprogram Krillian medical nanites to boost human healing in jungle environments. The fusion of primitive and advanced, natural and technological created innovations neither pure approach could have achieved. Humans began developing technologies that worked with nature rather than against it. Bioweapons that used natural processes. Defensive systems that incorporated living trees. Communication networks that piggybacked on mycelial connections between forest plants. Dr. Chun, now fully integrated into jungle life, made a breakthrough that exemplified this new approach. Working with shamans and scientists, she developed what they called forest mind, a heightened awareness state that combined meditation techniques, mild psychoactive compound from jungle plants, and neural interfaces reverse-engineered from Krillian technology. Users of Forest Mind reported extraordinary experiences. They could sense Krillian presence through subtle environmental changes. They could navigate in complete darkness by feeling electromagnetic fields. Some claimed they could communicate with the jungle itself, though Chun suspected this was their subconscious processing thousands of tiny environmental cues. Whatever the explanation, forest mind users became the most effective jungle fighters. They moved like animals, thought like computers, and fought like nothing the Krillians had ever encountered. A single forest mind scout could track and eliminate entire Krillian patrols without firing a shot. The Krillians tried to counter with their own enhancements: combat drugs that heightened senses, implants that detected human pheromones, armor that adapted to jungle conditions. But every adaptation was met with counter-adaptation. The jungle fighters had home advantage and evolutionary history on their side. 6 months into the Jungle War, the situation reached a critical point. Krillian forces controlled most major cities and open territories, but vast swaths of Earth remained free. Worse, the jungle zones were expanding. Humans had begun aggressive reforestation, using fast-growing modified plants to create new defensive territories. Urban resistance groups, inspired by jungle fighter success, created vertical forests in cities, buildings overgrown with vines, and trees that provided cover for guerrilla operations. Parks became miniature jungles. Abandoned areas transformed into green mazes where knowledge of terrain trumped technological superiority. The economic cost to the Krillian Empire mounted daily. Earth was supposed to be a quick conquest, its resources feeding the Empire's expansion. Instead, it had become a quagmire consuming vast military resources with no end in sight. Political pressure on Commander Zexar intensified. In this, Supreme General Vextor commanded via hyperspace communication. Whatever it takes, the Empire cannot appear weak. But Zexar had learned what his superiors hadn't. Earth wasn't like other worlds they'd conquered. It wasn't just a planet with intelligent life. It was a planet where that life had spent millions of years learning to survive in every environment. The jungles were just the beginning. Humans were adapting their jungle warfare techniques to forests, mountains, swamps, even Arctic regions. Reports came in of Krillian forces in Siberian forests being hunted by humans who moved through snow-covered trees like ghosts. Desert fighters in Australia used techniques learned from jungle warriors, turning sparse vegetation into death traps. The infection of successful resistance spread faster than any disease. In the depths of the Amazon, a council of war convened. Leaders from every major jungle region gathered in person or through secure communication. Maria Santos, now recognized as one of the premier tactical minds of the resistance, presented their situation. "We've proven jungles can't be conquered," she said, "but we're still losing. They hold our cities, our industries, our populations. We need to take the fight beyond the green zones." "How?" asked a Congo fighter. "In open ground, their technology wins." "Then, we don't fight in open ground," Wolf Anderson interjected. "We make everywhere a jungle. Not literally, conceptually. We've learned the principles. Environmental knowledge beats technological superiority. Patience beats aggression. Integration beats domination. We teach these principles to every human in every environment." The discussion continued for days. Strategies were debated, refined, adapted. The jungle had given humanity more than refuge. It had given them a philosophy of warfare suited to their nature. Not the industrial warfare of the past century, but something older and yet newer. Warfare that used human adaptability as its primary weapon. As plans took shape, something remarkable happened. Territorial animals in the jungles, jaguars, tigers, gorillas, began showing less fear of humans and more aggression toward Krillians. It was as if the ecosystem itself recognized who belonged and who didn't. Scientists debated whether this was coincidence or something deeper, but jungle fighters simply accepted it as natural. They were part of the forest now. The forest protected its own. The war entered a new phase. Jungle fighters emerged from their green fortresses not as raiders, but as teachers. They shared hard-won knowledge with urban resistance cells. They taught mountain fighters how to use vertical terrain like a three-dimensional jungle. They showed Arctic resistance how to use ice and snow as living environments rather than mere obstacles. Most importantly, they shared the psychological insights that made their success possible. Humans weren't trying to beat the Krillians at their own game. They were changing the game entirely. Let the invaders have their plasma weapons and force fields. Humans had something more powerful, a planet that had shaped them and that they had learned to shape in return. Commander Zexar stood in his command center, watching feeds from across Earth. His forces held strategic positions, but controlled nothing. Every secured area required constant vigilance against infiltration. Every supply line faced harassment. Every soldier showed signs of stress that no amount of training could alleviate. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we're detecting massive movement in all jungle regions. Thousands of humans, possibly tens of thousands, mobilizing simultaneously. Preparing for attack? Unknown, sir. But if they're coordinating globally..." The officer didn't finish. They all understood. If jungle fighters worldwide acted in concert, if they brought their tactics to every battlefield, the occupation would face its greatest test. Zexar gazed at Earth's holographic image, its green zones pulsing like a living heart. He had come to conquer a primitive world, and found instead a species that turned primitivity into power. The jungle war was far from over, but already it had changed both invaders and defenders in ways none could have predicted. In the canopy above the Amazon, Maria Santos watched the sun set through leaves that had sheltered humanity's ancestors for millions of years. Tomorrow, the offensive would begin. Not to drive the Krillians off Earth, not yet, but to prove that nowhere on the planet was safe for those who didn't belong. The trees rustled with evening wind, carrying messages in a language older than words. The jungle had taught its children well. Now it was time to see if those lessons could free an entire world. The global offensive began at dawn on every continent simultaneously, not with massive armies or grand battles, but with 10,000 small actions that struck like venomous snake bites. The jungles had kept their promise and sent forth their children to reclaim the world. In New York, where Krillian forces had turned Central Park into a garrison, the trees came alive before sunrise. Resistance fighters who had trained in the Amazon moved through familiar paths, now transplanted to urban terrain. They had spent months secretly encouraging growth, introducing fast-spreading vines, creating microenvironments where their skills gave them absolute advantage. The Krillian garrison commander woke to find his perimeter guards missing and crude drawings made from bioluminescent jungle fungi glowing on every wall. Human handprints surrounded by leaves, the new symbol of Earth's resistance. In London, the Thames had been seeded with aquatic plants from the Congo that now formed floating islands. Fighters emerged from these green rafts to strike at Krillian positions along the riverbank, then vanished in a vegetation that shouldn't exist in English waters but now thrived thanks to careful cultivation and climate modification. The pattern repeated across the globe. Humans weren't trying to defeat the Krillians in conventional battle. They were proving that Earth itself was hostile to the invaders, that every environment could become a jungle if you understood the principles of environmental warfare. Commander Zexar watched the casualty reports with something approaching despair. His losses weren't catastrophic in pure numbers, but the psychological impact was devastating. His soldiers no longer felt safe anywhere. Every tree was a potential ambush. Every patch of growth could hide enemies. The careful order the Krillians had imposed on occupied territories crumbled as nature reclaimed spaces with shocking speed. "They're not just using the environment," Science Commander Dexar observed. "They're transforming it. Look at these growth rates. These plants have been genetically modified using our own technology combined with their biological knowledge. They're creating new ecosystems designed specifically for warfare." The fusion of human innovation and natural selection had produced organisms that seemed designed to torment Krillian forces. Vines that grew toward electromagnetic signatures. Flowers that released spores causing severe allergic reactions in Krillian respiratory systems. Trees that could detect alien pheromones and signal human fighters through chemical releases. Dr. Sarah Chun, now one of humanity's leading biowarfare specialists, had spent months developing these organisms in hidden jungle laboratories. Her team combined traditional breeding with alien genetic manipulation technology and ancient shamanic knowledge about plant behavior. The results were organisms that Earth's biosphere accepted as natural, but that possessed capabilities no natural evolution would have produced. "We're not creating weapons," she explained to skeptical resistance leaders. "We're giving Earth's immune system the tools to reject an infection. The Krillians are invasive species. We're helping our planet evolve defenses." The philosophical shift was as important as the tactical one. Humans had stopped seeing themselves as separate from their environment, instead recognizing themselves as Earth's conscious immune response. The planet and its dominant species were acting as one organism defending itself. This unity manifested in unexpected ways. Animals that had feared humans for centuries began cooperating with resistance fighters. Birds served as early warning systems. Primates helped transport supplies through canopies. Predators ignored human fighters while stalking Krillian patrols. Scientists couldn't fully explain it. Some theorized that humans unconsciously released pheromones, marking them as part of the ecosystem. Others suggested that animals recognized the aliens as unnatural threats. Indigenous peoples simply smiled and said the Earth remembered who its children were. Lieutenant Vesnor, one of the few Krillian officers with jungle combat experience, tried to warn his superiors. "We're not fighting humans anymore. We're fighting a planet. Every organism from bacteria to trees has turned against us. How do you defeat an entire biosphere?" His warnings were dismissed as defeatism until the Shanghai incident proved him right. Krillian forces had maintained strict control over the massive city, using it as a primary administrative center. The urban environment seemed safe from jungle warfare tactics, but the humans had spent months preparing. Every park, every rooftop garden, every crack in concrete had been seeded with specially designed organisms. When the signal came, Shanghai transformed in hours. Vines erupted from sewers, growing at impossible speeds to entangle vehicles and equipment. Spores filled the air, creating a fog that disrupted Krillian sensors while leaving humans unaffected. Buildings became vertical forests as climbing plants raced up walls, creating three-dimensional battlefields where jungle-trained fighters excelled. The Krillian response was predictable: fire and plasma trying to burn out the infection. But the plants had been designed to thrive on heat, converting thermal energy into explosive growth. The harder the Krillians fought, the faster the green conquest spread. Within days, Shanghai resembled an ancient ruin overgrown by centuries of jungle. Krillian forces retreated to hardened bunkers, essentially imprisoned by the city they had conquered. Similar transformations occurred in cities worldwide, each adapted to local climate and conditions, but following the same principle: turn every environment into one where humans had evolutionary advantage. The War Council aboard Zexar's flagship grew increasingly fractious. Some commanders advocated total planetary bombardment, accepting the loss of resources. Others pushed for biological warfare to exterminate humanity entirely. But every extreme solution faced the same problem. Earth's value lay in its living biosphere. Destroy that, and they might as well glass the planet from orbit. "We could negotiate," a younger officer suggested, immediately facing hostile glares from veterans who had never considered such disgrace. "The Empire does not negotiate with primitives," Supreme General Vextor snarled over the communication link. But privately, Zexar wondered if that officer had a point. This war was unlike any in Krillian history. They faced not a technological equal, but a species that had turned their lack of advanced technology into an advantage. Every adaptation the Krillians made was countered by human creativity and environmental mastery. In the jungles that had started it all, a new generation of fighters was emerging, Children who had grown up in the Green Resistance showed capabilities that amazed veteran soldiers. They could navigate in absolute darkness by sound and smell. They could communicate through touch and gesture in complete silence. Some could allegedly sense Krillian presence through electromagnetic perception, evolved through exposure to alien technology. These jungle children represented humanity's rapid adaptation. In just 2 years of war, humans had begun evolving. Not biologically, which would take millennia, but culturally and technologically in ways that mimicked biological adaptation. They were becoming a new form of human, one perfectly suited to resist technological invaders. Kenji Nakamura, now leading a technical resistance cell, had integrated so completely with jungle life that visiting urban fighters barely recognized him. His skin bore traditional tattoos made with smart ink that could display tactical data. His nervous system interfaced with mycelial networks through implants reverse-engineered from Krillian technology. He could literally communicate with modified trees, receiving data about enemy movements through chemical signals. "We're becoming what we need to become," he explained to new recruits. "Not abandoning our humanity, but expanding it. The jungle taught us that adaptation is survival. Now we adapt faster than any enemy can counter." The Krillians tried increasingly desperate measures. They released hunter-killer robots immune to biological warfare. The jungle fighters responded by using the environment against the machines, electromagnetic vines that disrupted circuits, insects trained to nest in mechanical joints, fungi that corroded specific alloys. When the Krillians introduced force fields that nothing organic could penetrate, humans developed hybrid weapons, traditional blowguns that fired projectiles of compressed alien metal, wooden spears with monomolecular edges carved using captured tools, vine nets that incorporated energy discharge fibers. Every escalation met counter-escalation, but the fundamental dynamic never changed. The Krillians were trying to impose order through technology. Humans were embracing chaos through biology. On Earth, chaos had home advantage. The psychological warfare intensified beyond anything military manuals had imagined. Jungle fighters didn't just defeat Krillian patrols. They transformed them into warnings. Soldiers would be found days later, physically unharmed but mentally shattered, speaking in broken voices about trees that moved and ground that thought. Their testimony spread fear more effectively than any weapon. Some Krillian units reported mass hallucinations, entire forests walking toward their positions, the Earth itself rising up in humanoid form, conversations with planets. Medical examinations found traces of complex psychoactive compounds, but whether these visions were purely chemical or touched something deeper remained uncertain. Captain Wolf Anderson, leading a strike force in the Pacific Northwest, had developed tactics that seemed to blur the line between military operation and mystical experience. His fighters used combinations of traditional meditation, mild psychedelics, and technological interfaces to achieve states of consciousness where they claimed to perceive the forest's own awareness. "Every tree is a neuron," Wolf explained to a skeptical scientist. "The mycelial networks are synapses. The forest thinks slowly and strangely, but it thinks. We're just learning to translate. Whether metaphor or reality, the results were undeniable." Wolf's teams achieved synchronization levels that seemed telepathic, moving through forests with perfect coordination despite radio silence. They anticipated Krillian movements with accuracy that suggested either supernatural perception or subconscious processing of environmental data at unprecedented levels. The turning point came during what historians would later call the Green Week. Resistance cells worldwide launched coordinated attacks that transformed entire regions. Not violent assaults, but ecological invasions that reclaimed territory through biological means. In Australia, the outback bloomed with engineered flora that turned desert into jungle in days. The plants had been designed to thrive in arid conditions while creating microclimates that supported more diverse ecosystems. Krillian bases found themselves surrounded by forests that hadn't existed a week before. In Russia, Modified Arctic moss spread across frozen tundra, generating heat through biological processes and creating pockets of warmth where cold-adapted jungle plants could establish foothold. The sight of tropical trees growing through snow while maintaining internal temperatures above freezing shattered Krillian assumptions about biological limits. The Amazon delivered the masterstroke. Maria Santos led an operation that didn't attack Krillian forces, but simply encouraged the jungle's natural expansion. Using growth accelerants and careful cultivation, they pushed the rainforest borders outward at kilometers per day. Abandoned areas became impassable wilderness overnight. Roads vanished under green tides. Small Krillian outposts woke to find themselves island in seas of vegetation. "We're not reconquering territory," Santos announced in a broadcast that reached both human and Krillian forces. "We're returning it to its rightful state. Earth was green before we built our cities. It will be green again after invaders leave." The psychological impact on Krillian morale was crushing. They had come to conquer a civilized world and found themselves fighting the planet's primal nature. Every victory was temporary, reclaimed by green growth that seemed unstoppable. Their advanced weapons could destroy, but not control. Their technology could kill, but not convince an entire biosphere to submit. Defections began among lower-ranked Krillian soldiers. Some simply walked into jungles and surrendered, preferring capture to continued warfare against an enemy that attacked minds as effectively as bodies. These defectors provided crucial intelligence about growing dissent within Krillian ranks. "Our soldiers no longer trust their senses," one defector explained. "Everything on this planet feels wrong. The air tastes hostile. The ground feels angry. Even water seems to resist us. How do you fight a world that hates your existence?" Human treatment of prisoners became another weapon. Instead of traditional detention, captured Krillians were integrated into jungle communities. They were taught to work with rather than against the environment. Some began to understand what humans had discovered. Cooperation with nature brought peace, while domination brought only conflict. These prisoner communities became unexpected bridges. A few Krillians, particularly younger ones without decades of imperial indoctrination, began to appreciate Earth's approach. They shared technological knowledge in exchange for learning environmental harmony. Some even suggested that their own worlds, devastated by over-industrialization, could benefit from Earth's bio-integrated technologies. Commander ZXAR faced an impossible situation. He couldn't win through force. Every destroyed jungle regrew stronger. He couldn't maintain control. His forces were psychological wrecks. He couldn't justify continued losses. The Empire had other conflicts that needed resources being wasted on Earth. The final blow came from an unexpected source. The Galactic Council, a loose confederation of neutral species, had been monitoring the Earth conflict. They issued a statement that shocked the Krillian Empire. "Earth has demonstrated a unique form of resistance that suggests a civilization more sophisticated than initial assessments indicated. Any species that can turn their entire biosphere into a coordinated defense system possesses capabilities that deserve respect and study, not conquest. We recommend immediate cessation of hostilities and establishment of diplomatic contact." The statement gave ZXAR political cover for what he had already concluded was necessary. Earth couldn't be conquered by traditional means. The cost in resources and morale had already exceeded any possible benefit. The jungle war had evolved into something beyond military conflict, a fundamental clash between different approaches to existence. Secret negotiations began in the most unlikely venue, a clearing deep in the Amazon where human and Krillian representatives met under towering trees. Maria Santos led the human delegation, while ZXAR himself represented the Empire. The choice of location was deliberate. In the jungle, humans held psychological advantage, but they also demonstrated their core principle. "You could have developed weapons to destroy us utterly," ZXAR admitted during one session. "Instead, you chose to defend through integration with your environment." "Why?" "Because destruction is easy," Santos replied. "Any species can build bigger bombs. But working with life, enhancing rather than replacing nature, that's hard. That's what makes us human. We're gardeners, not just warriors. Earth taught us that lesson. Now we're teaching it to you. The negotiations lasted weeks. Krillian pride struggled against practical reality. But eventually, terms emerged that both sides could accept. The Krillians would withdraw from Earth. In return, humanity would share their biointegration technologies and environmental restoration techniques, knowledge desperately needed on worlds the Empire had stripped bare. The agreement included provisions that shocked the galactic community. Earth would establish exchange programs, teaching other species how to work with rather than against their environments. Krillian technology would help humans repair damage from their own industrial period. Both species would collaborate on developing technologies that enhanced rather than replaced natural systems. As Krillian forces prepared for withdrawal, something unexpected happened. Some soldiers requested permission to remain on Earth, not as conquerors but as students. They wanted to learn what the jungles had to teach. A few were accepted into rehabilitation programs, beginning the long process of switching from dominance to cooperation mindsets. The final ceremony occurred at the site of the first jungle battle. Commander XAR stood where Major Krilltalk had fallen, surrounded by trees that had witnessed the transformation of both species. He placed a Krillian banner on the ground, not in conquest, but in acknowledgement. "We came as conquerors," he said, his words transmitted to both human and Krillian forces. "We leave as something else. You have taught us that strength comes in many forms. Your jungles have shown us that true power works with life, not against it. This is not defeat. This is education." Maria Santos stepped forward, carrying a small tree, a hybrid created during the war that combined Earth genetics with biological principles learned from Krillian technology. Its leaves shimmered with an almost metallic sheen, beautiful and alien, yet perfectly integrated into Earth's biosphere. "Plant this on your homeworld," she offered. "Let it remind you that different approaches can coexist, that technology and nature need not be enemies, that sometimes the primitive path leads to the most advanced destinations." XAR accepted the tree with all four hands, recognizing the gesture's significance. The Krillian Empire had never accepted a gift from a conquered species before. But Earth had never truly been conquered. It had done something far more powerful. It had changed the conquerors. As Krillian ships lifted off from Earth, they left behind more than abandoned bases. They left a transformed planet where cities and jungles were learning to coexist, where human technology was evolving to enhance rather than exploit nature. The jungle war had ended not in victory or defeat, but in transformation. In the Amazon, where it all began, the trees stood taller, their canopy hiding secrets that had saved a world. Children played in their shade. Human children who could speak to forests, who understood that Earth's true strength lay not in weapons, but in the patient power of growth and adaptation. The stars above held other threats, other challenges that Earth would face. But humanity had learned the greatest lesson their planet could teach. They were not separate from their world, but part of it. And as long as Earth's jungles grew, as long as humans remembered their connection to the green heart of their world, no force in the universe could truly conquer them. The war was over. The real work, healing both worlds and building a future where nature and technology dance together, was just beginning. And in every jungle on Earth, in every tree that rustled with wind and memory, the planet itself seemed to whisper its approval. Humanity had come home to the forests that birthed them. And in that homecoming, they had found the key to the stars themselves, not through domination, but through harmony, not through conquest, but through growth. The jungle had taught its final lesson. True civilization didn't overcome nature, but became one with it. As night fell over Earth's forests, the insects sang their ancient songs. But now those songs carried new meanings, new harmonies that spoke of futures where worlds could be both green and great, primitive and powerful. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere in the depths of the Amazon, an old shaman smiled and nodded. The spirits of the forest had kept their promise. Their children had remembered the old ways and made them new. The trees would stand for another 1,000,000 years, and with them, humanity's true strength would endure among the stars.